A disclaimer before we start. This episode of Cinema Rex on Mehrtash The Cow was scheduled to be recorded later this year, but we felt compelled to bump it up due to the shocking, devastating, and horrific murder of Dariush Mehrtash and his wife Vahide Mohammadi. The Iranian film world and Iranian community as a whole is grieving the senseless loss of these two individuals who had their lives taken from them on October 14th, 2023, just 6 days before the recording of this episode. It's a tragic assault that the Iranian world has unfortunately become all too familiar with, and although we can make estimations as to the source of the attacks, the truth is that at the time of this recording, details are sparse. While discussing Mehrtash's career, life, and legacy, we will touch on the details that are known to us as of the date this was recorded. Listener discretion is advised. With that, we take a moment of silence in memory of Vahide Mohammadi and Dariush Mehrtash. Rest in peace. You're listening to Cinema Rex. It's an Iranian film podcast. Episode 4, Dariush Mehrtash's The Cow.
Basically, after Saw Something Wrong, Persia went to this downhill.
That I knew.
And then they picked it back up after Safavieh because they were like, oh, we're gonna be Shia now to not let other people rule over us. And then it's a whole thing. And then Mongols came, and then it's honestly a miracle that we still speak Farsi. Thanks to Ferdowsi.
Yeah, Ferdowsi, big ups.
Yeah.
My man.
Yeah.
Shout out to Ferdowsi.
All right, I'm starting. Durud bar shoma dostan aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast, where we discuss all things Iranian films. Good morning, Farhan. How are you?
I'm good. How are
Farhan,
you?
you're on the podcast right now. How are you doing?
I'm good. I thought you
Welcome
were
to the
still
show.
talking. I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm a polite individual. What can I say?
We're going to do our best to keep this light, but as you are well aware, this is a very important and somber episode of Cinema Rex, one that we've bumped up ahead of schedule due to recent events in the news that I'm sure we're going to get to. But today we are discussing the film,
Gov.
also known as The Cow, which was directed by the master Dariush Mehrtash. And I am pleased to introduce our guest. His name is Mehrtash Mohit. Mehrtash Mohit is an independent Iranian-Canadian filmmaker based in Toronto. He completed his bachelor degree in material engineering in Iran, which is very impressive. He made his Iranian parents very proud. He moved to Canada in 2011 to pursue his passion in filmmaking with a background in documentaries and short films. He completed his MFA in film production at York University. Mehrtash's directing credits include the films Trees Between Us, More Vivid Than Sculpture, Fariba, screened at many festivals, including Images International Film Festivals in Toronto, International Documentary Festival, and Retributive Ma'int, winner of Best Foreign Language Film at NYC Shorts, and nominated for Golden Sheaf. Wow, the Golden Sheaf Award at Yorkton Film Festival in 3 categories, including Best Directing and screened in many more. And of course, The Shave, produced by the Canadian Film Centre, which you're a recent graduate of, the Directors Lab. And it's where we met. Mehrtash is a good friend of mine and a close collaborator. We're working on a few film projects together, and I will gladly say that nobody knows more about Iranian cinema than he, in terms of the people I know. Now, Mehrtash will claim that he knows hundreds of other people who know more about Iranian cinema, but honestly, this guy is like got a Scorsese-esque mind palace for Iranian films. So I think it's very good to have him here, and I'm very happy to have him for this very important episode of Cinema Rex. Mehrtash, welcome to the Cinema Rex podcast.
Thank you. It's amazing to be here. Thank you so much. This is going to be very fun. And I'm not going to let you meet any other people that I know. So I'll be the person who knows the most films, Iranian films, around your circle.
I find it very difficult to think of even how someone could know more films than you, because I haven't yet mentioned a movie that you don't know. I mean, you've done a deep dive on films all across the gamut in terms of art house films, commercial films, film Farsi, Like, you
Yeah.
know your stuff.
Yeah.
Why? Tell me.
Well, I think part of it is growing up in Iran because there's not much else you could watch, really. It's like you watch a lot of Iranian films and you hear about the films that my parents watched, so you go and watch them. And there was a certain point that we had satellite TV and there were Persian channels and they would show like old Iranian films, even film Farsis, like all of them. And then later on, when I actually was really getting into know films, I went out and, tried to watch all the old films. Yeah, I think it's just mostly growing up there and not having access to everything. Later on, obviously, there was illegal DVDs that came out that you could watch everything and just like go give a name of a film and then find it. And I had a lot of hipster friends, I think, who were really coming back and it's like, have you seen this film? And then they're like, you had to go watch it. It was, so I think that also attributed to it.
I just imagine like a hipster bully stopping you on your way to school. They're like, have you seen this movie? Like,
Yeah,
no.
have you
They're like, go back and watch. You're not allowed to cross this bridge unless you watch this movie.
Exactly. And you had to give a synopsis at the beginning of the bridge. It was like, what is it? No.
So growing up in Iran, in post-Islamic Revolution Iran specifically, how was the process before DVDs made it easier? What was the process of seeing movies? I mean, obviously you'd go to local theaters, but was that the only method? Like, I guess were you relegated to only seeing the films that were sanctioned under the Islamic Republic, or? Well,
theater, if you wanted to watch something in theater, yes, you had to. Obviously, there was not much playing. And I grew up in suburban Tehran, like this small town near Tehran. So we had only one theater that you could only go watch in the city. And then otherwise you had to go to Tehran, which we did quite often. But if you wanted to watch films that were not playing on theater, yes. So it was back when I was very young, you had to smuggle VHS.
Wow.
Yeah, you guys, there was also at a time like every Nowruz, there was a VHS of, like, tell you how it was. There was a VHS of new songs of the singers who fled Iran. They would put out albums and they come out and everyone smuggled the VHS and like we would all gather together. Nowruz. Part of the tradition was to watch those music videos. So it was kind of similar with movies. You had to find VHS. Those rentals you could go, but there were always sanctions by Iran. Later on, we were one of the first who, thanks to my dad, got a satellite TV, which was extremely illegal at a time. And we got one that was like very big. So I remember when I was walking back from school, you could see because they'll also tell you to not tell it at school that you have satellite TV, right?
Mm-hmm,
So it's a whole different discussion of why and how terrible the generation who came out and lied every day to their school, because they would ask us even at school, it's like, hey, do you guys have, does your parent have alcohol, satellite TV, or VHS, or like whatever? So
that sounds like a perfect Friday night for me. Alcohol, satellite TV. And
I know,
VHS.
right?
That's the name.
That's awesome.
I feel like that's the name of like an Iranian period piece set in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Literally. So anyway, it was satellite TV, VHS, smuggling VHS, and later on it was DVDs. That was still till the day I left. It was still, if you wanted to go, you would go to a video store, and if you knew the guy, you were like, "Yo, give me the good stuff," and then he would go back to another store, grab this big duffel bag, and come out and like put the DVDs on the front. It was like, this is the new ones that I have. And you could actually give him a name of a film you wanted, and he would go and like find it and bring it for you. It's quite
What's crazy about that is that like smuggling a VHS is no easy task. It's
not.
Probably a lot easier to smuggle DVDs, but like smuggling a brick of a VHS.
Well, and it's not just one.
Heavy,
They're probably smuggling like multiple
hundreds.
at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's heavy and it's boxy and you can't. It's like tough.
You need a massive trench coat.
Also, imagine the VHS player itself was also illegal,
smuggled.
right?
Oh,
So you
it
had to
was?
smuggle. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Was there anything? Was it harder at the time? And again, pre-DVD, was it more difficult to find Hollywood American films than compared to Iranian films that were censored or banned? Like, what was the harder one to find? Iranian films that were Farsi language but banned by the government, or
You wouldn't
Hollywood
actually.
films.
You wouldn't actually. There weren't films that were banned by the government. They wouldn't come out. You wouldn't be able
Right.
to see them because they wouldn't really. It was like right now if they ban something, some people just leak it online or whatever. But it wasn't that easy to find them, so you wouldn't see. You would hear about a film that was banned, but you would not be able to watch it at until after a few years after, because they were also trying to get the permit to show it, so that's why they wouldn't leak it, so they were still hopeful that they might. So mostly
okay.
it was Hollywood films, yeah, or foreign films. If the big films, I remember action films were a thing because I had an uncle who really liked Steven Seagal at a time.
Yeah.
And they smuggle those and you would just get together. But the nice thing about it was an event, right? Because it was somebody had a film, so you would go and sit together and watch it.
That's cool.
And yeah, it was quite fun, and like a whole family would get together and watch it. And yeah, and the awkward moments when if there was like a sex scene in a movie, so they had
you're
to
watching
change.
with
Yeah,
your whole family.
they had to change the channel. They were like, "Oops, sorry, there are kids here."
Yeah. Do you? When did you first discover Dariush Mehjui?
Well, I don't even remember because you knew about him. But yeah, the first film of him that I watched was Layla, which I found amazing and fascinating. And after that, I don't know if you guys want to talk about it. After that, it was Hamoon, which is another. It's an insane film. Hamoon these are the films that are like cultural phenomenon, cultural name. So you have. So I remember when Shaki Bai died, people were talking about, the Hamoon of Iranian cinema has died. Like they knew him because of that film, and Hamoon was such a big cultural impact, and especially among like the intellectuals or like the ones who were like like Iranians really like to call themselves intellectuals when they watch anyway.
No,
And that's why they did the revolution.
It's about everything, Mehrtash. It's not just about things like that. We're experts on washing dishes, on how to sort your laundry, on how to like make friends. Like it's always no. Let me tell you how to.
Yeah,
do this.
exactly. Yeah, the cow was also. I have another story of like how they showed us the cow at school. It was the only movie that they showed us in our school, in high school. Our literature teacher showed us that movie because we were studying. You would study the contemporary writers and stuff. And Ghulam Hossein Saidi, this movie is based on one of his stories. We were studying his work, and he showed the film that was based on that book. So that was the second time I was watching The Cow, and which was quite surprising to show a pre-revolution film in Iran at a high school, like religious high school. I don't know if the principal knew about it or not, but yeah.
We'll get to it when we talk to trivia, but this was one of the things that kept coming up in the research was Khomeini was specifically a big proponent of this film, and like actually ended up having talks with Mehjui about it.
Wild. I'm excited to get into that later.
So let's just dive right into plot summary because today we're doing The Cow. I'll just jump into it. Often credited as being the first Iranian New Wave film, The Cow is a window into the lives of the tightly knit community whose livestock is under constant threat of being rustled. One of the most important community members is Masht Hassan, who owns the only cow in the remote and desolate village. He treats the cow as his best friend and own child. When Hassan goes away, a horrible unseen incident occurs and the cow dies. Knowing the relationship between Masht Hassan and his cow, the villagers cover up the evidence of the death and tell him upon his return that his cow ran away. Masht Hassan is devastated, unable to cope with the loss of his beloved cow, as well as the loss of livestock that affects his social stature at the village. Hassan gradually goes insane, following a nervous breakdown, and believes he is the cow, adopting such mannerisms as eating hay and sleeping in the barn. His wife and the villagers try in vain to restore his sanity and decide to make an attempt at taking him into town to get him to a hospital. It has no Rotten Tomatoes score, as it doesn't have enough modern critical reviews, but it has an audience score of 91%. Mehrtash, what did you think of The Cow?
This was the fourth time I think I watched it, and I like it. Simply, I think it was a film ahead of its time, very much in line with the master filmmakers of the world that was happening. I cannot find a flaw in it, to be honest with you. There are some scenes that I might not love, but I can't find a flaw in it, and it's entertaining. It's philosophical. It's like beautifully shot, beautifully acted. I liked it. I mean, I think it's an amazing film.
Why? Okay, can you just explain a little bit about like what new wave means to you and how like I mean, you don't have to talk about the Italian new wave, but specifically this is considered the birth of Iranian new wave. So what do you think it is specifically about this film and his attempts at filmmaking that actually granted that title?
Well, one thing there. So like I think Brick, the Mud Brick and Mirror was done before it by Gulistan, and there was another film, but Kimia V, I think he did it. They were also like created to be the start of new wave, but because they were not popular, and this one did amazing in theater, this was considered the start of the new wave. The reason why is because back then you would only had Film Farsi that was happening, right? So it was there was no story. Commercial. It was very commercial, just like dancing and singing, and Heroes just goes and rescues everyone. So this one was the first one that actually had, some cinematic value, if you want to consider it.
Right.
That and after that, because it did well with public, I mean, there's a whole story I'm sure you're going to talk about of how it was banned, and then even before Revolution, and then it became. But why it was considered, because it was right after that who Kimiyai as well. At the same year, he made another film, and they were both a reaction of all the, again, intellectuals of at the time of Iran try to kind of react to the stupidness of the Iranian cinema at a time, and then they made this, and then after that there was another one, and then started doing more of these films, and then there was this cultural discourse that was happening at the time about like, yes, let's make this cinema, let's treat it as art, and like let's explore things. And they were obviously influenced by the French cinema, like culture back then. It was just generally very influenced by the French, and I think the reason why, because after this, just more and more stuff was coming out that had recognition.
Farhan, what did you think of The Cow? Because I have a feeling I've gotten to know your tastes.
I liked it. So these are my initial thoughts. I just kind of jotted down randomly. I thought the opening sequence was really cool. I'm curious to know, technically speaking, how they pulled that off, especially in Iran in the 60s, because it was 69, right, that the film came out?
Yeah. Do you mean opening shots as in like the
opening sequence, the title sequence?
Torture. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because obviously when you're doing a opening sequence like that, it requires a little bit of technical prowess, and I think with Film Farsi there wasn't a lot of that. So I'm just curious to know, practically speaking, what efforts went into accomplishing it. Immediately, something that stood out to me was the cinematography of the film. Kaveh, you texted me this earlier, but you mentioned that this was by far the most beautiful film that we've covered on the podcast so far, and I can't agree more. Like it was beautiful, absolutely stunning. And I was sitting there and I was like, I wonder how they accomplished even just making sure that every single shot was in focus and properly exposed, right? Because this is, again, this is not a very sophisticated time for cinema in Iran. And a lot of the movies that came after this that were shot on film still have sequences that are either overexposed or out of focus. In fact, a lot of Hollywood films that came out around this time have tons of shots that are overexposed and out of focus. Like big, massive Hollywood films. Yeah. I thought pretty early on, I thought that it was giving me like major Kurosawa vibes. It kind of felt a little bit like a cross between The Elephant Man and with like a Kurosawa take on it. With
like Seven Samurai or something, the Buluri or
the
like
Bulurieg show
in
up.
the-
Yeah, 100%. With that shot where he sees the three bandits from the other village, like at the top of the hill, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is like 100% Kurosawa vibes. The music, I love the music. I love that he was implementing classical Iranian music. That was a major criticism that I had about a lot of Kiarostami's work, is that his over-reliance on a lot of European orchestral music. Whereas this, I thought, was beautiful and very much aligned with, our cultural history. There was a little exchange of dialogue that I mentioned here that I really liked, where the one bandit shows up with the dead chicken. He knocks on the door, and the woman's like, "Is that from the other village?" He's like, "Yeah." "Did you steal it?" "Yeah." And she just goes, and she takes it anyway.
Yeah.
I like that it's like, well, she knows that she probably shouldn't be eating a stolen chicken, but they're like poor, so she'll take what she can get, which I thought was funny. On that same line of thought, there's a shot with like a three-legged dog that also I thought added some character to the village. The baby donkey that comes through the gate, like these were all little details in the town that really stood out to me as feeling like this town was real and alive. I also wrote that it seems like everyone in the town has more reverence for the cow than they do for the like, and I hate calling him this, but it's a bit of like a cliche, but like the village idiot, right? There's this poor guy who is probably suffering from some kind of mental illness or I don't know if he was born with something, but he's very clearly neurodivergent from everybody else in the film. And the opening scene after the opening sequence is them trying to burn him alive, and they're all laughing about it. And as the movie goes on, we see how they give more reverence to the animals than they do to him, which I thought was interesting.
That's partly because, and we'll get to it, I guess, when we talk about deeper analysis, but it's like the cow has worth to the village and the village idiot has no worth to the village. And I think a big thing of what Mehrtash is saying in this film is like the importance of what your worth is to a community.
Also,
or like at least the perception, the effect it has on you.
These are all like, because don't forget, it's based on Ghulam Hussain Saeedi's short stories book, like Azodaran Bayal, which is basically this whole village that goes through, basically the whole themes of that story is death, and mostly death and mourning and survival. So all of these little things have meanings, like symbol and metaphors, and the village idiots and the cow and the dog animals are very, very important in it.
Yeah.
And the characters, I don't know if you notice in the film, the Kat Khoda, like the head of the village, always asks the other guy what to do, even though he is the head of the village.
Yeah.
And,
And he mentions too that he's like, you're the most articulate out of all of us.
Yeah,
So-
which is all like, a jab at the society at a time, and
sure.
like the way that he wrote the story. And because they were good friends as well, like Mehrtash and Ghulam Hussain Saeedi, they were both very good friends, and they wrote the script together. So a lot of the things, I actually went back and read the story and some of the other stories in the book after I watched this, and you see the difference between the actual story and the screenplay for this. So he added actually different elements from the other short stories in that book
Into the film. That's
film.
cool. Well, and
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, a lot of these things that I'm pointing out, they're not criticisms of the story. They're little funny things or weird things or criticisms I have with the village and with the characters, which I think actually adds to the film quite a bit, and is part of why I really like the film, is because it makes the characters in the story feel very real, and it gives character to the actual village as a whole. And one of the last things I wrote here was just with the ending of the film, that this guy that his name's Islam, right? Everyone looks up to this guy. He's the most articulate in the village. He has the most respect for Hassan. He's the guy that ends up treating him like an animal at the end. And that's what like sets him off to like run off the cliff. And I thought that was very moving to see that. It was very heartbreaking to see that. And And then when he leaves the village, he says, oh, don't worry, I'll go get him, which is very similar to how they treated the loss of the cow when they're like, oh, don't worry, like he's over that hill, we're going to go get him. And I thought that the ending was really beautiful.
One of the things that really stuck out to me is that the cinematography was so beautiful that I find there's very few moments you can't just take and keep portraits on your wall of. Like any still frame of that film could honestly, you could hang as a piece of artwork.
I agree, yeah.
Which I thought was just so beautiful. And one thing too, the shots and reverse shots, especially early on, I felt I could see the editing, but not as a form of criticism. That's not like to be like, oh, I see the editing. I meant like I could feel like every cut was so
thoughtful,
intentional and direct. And I was like, it really was like one of those first times, specifically in Iranian cinema, that I could give this to a young director and be like, you want to learn how to like choose your shots and choose, like, you want to see a film, like how to cut your film later on, watch even the first half hour of this film.
That is
because each shot is telling a story, it's a reaction, or it's painting a larger world. And it was so like, there isn't just a panning camera and then here's the cut to this. It's like every still shot cuts to the next still shot. And it does that Hitchcock thing of like, together the composition tells you something.
That is so fascinating. Just to interrupt you real quick, because like I did the same. I did that. Like as you were saying, like teaching to people how to do it. Like I was watching it and I would go back and I'd be like, oh, that shot is this shot, and then it cut to this, and then it's little. It took me like probably like 2.5 hours to watch the whole thing because I was just like keep going back and forward and like, well, how did this? Yeah, it's very on point. It's very intentional and very thoughtful.
And there's also, I want to say, because I wrote down that I thought I made a point of the music too. I thought the music was so beautiful and really resonated with me. And the musician, the artist's name is Hormoz Farhat, which I think we deserves a call out because I did really think beautiful choice of music. It was the first time that I specifically made a mental note.
Dariush Merjui played the Santur version of all of those things himself. I don't know if you guys knew that. Yeah.
Oh, for the final cut?
For the whole thing, yeah. All the Santur you hear is himself playing it.
But Hormoz Farhat wrote the composition.
Wrote the composition, yeah.
Hormoz is a name you don't hear enough. People need to bring that one back.
There was something too I was going to see. Hold on, let me find the shot composition is the best I think we've seen in any film. So like when I was saying to you the cinematography, it was just like that Kurosawa thing of like so much happening. Even if it's just a foreground background shot, it was like so that the shot was like there's so much depth to it. You could see a whole world. You could see, it was again like that thing of like it looked like a painting you could hang on. There's just
and so much attention put into that like achieving that shot composition. Like even the shot where all the villagers are looking through the window and it's shot from inside, the wall from inside is also exposed very well, as are the faces of everybody up at the window. And to achieve that is not an easy task. Like even if you were to do it digitally right now.
No, it's very, very like as I was watching it and I'll see all these shots and coverage, I was the exact same thought. I was like, this is insanely shot. And at the same time, I was like, damn, I wish I had time to do that on every shot, every movie you want to shoot. Because there's one scene, it has like 4 coverage and they're very thoughtful and they're set, and lighting it back then for film will take a lot of time and for different shots and different reactions. So like each of those scenes will take hours to shoot and will take meticulous attention to details and movements and blocking. And those actors, they were not cinema actors. They were all for the first time ever playing in movies. They were all theater actors. So their movements needed to be coordinated very well. Anyway, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
And you're shooting on film.
Just like a little, and you're shooting on film, which is quite... It just again it gives you why this became an Iranian new wave, because it's the first time really, I mean I would say the third time really, someone paying that much attention to everything and knowing what they're doing and bringing, because the technicals existed, they were just not demanded of them, right? The cinematographers clearly knew what to do. There was no director be like, oh, I need this to happen like this and let's create it. And they thrived on that.
One thing I wanted to add was I really like there's some subtle sense of humor throughout the whole thing too. Like in a film that you don't really expect it. One thing I really liked was they have this constant motif, especially the first time you see when the wife is hysterical outside. There's that man in the window who keeps saying, "What's happening?" and they're ignoring him.
One of my favorite things about
It's a running gag. You just like this guy never leaves his house. He just sticks his head out the window and he's like, "Hey, Islam, what's going on here?" And like, don't worry about it. And they just keep cutting to him and they don't answer him, ignore him.
It's so
which is
good.
very funny.
This is the peanut gallery from the Muppets.
Yeah.
It's like again, we probably jump into the deeper analysis. Like this is all like I actually wrote that character down as one of my favorite things. So these are all symbolism at a time that was put in there, right? The guy who just observes and is like, "Oh, what's going on?" And like, okay, like I have one of my favorite moments is when they're actually going after when they hear all at night and they're all going out, that the village is going crazy and he's still sleeping by his window. And then he wakes up, is like, "What's going on, Islam?" Okay. And he just goes back to his sleeping. And I highly recommend if anyone wants to go read the short stories of the book, because these characters are so prominent in all the other stories, and like you really get to, and it's intentionally, as you mentioned, it's humor put in there, funny, because it was at a time it's kind of what the society is.
What's the collection of short stories called?
Azodaron Bayal. So the village is called Bayal in the story, and the mourners of Bayal, basically.
Okay.
It's a collection of 8 short stories. They all happen in the village, and it's mostly surrounding, revolving around some sort of death in every story, and the villagers are dealing with it. And it was at a time a very big, and Saidi himself was a bit leftist at a time. He was leaning towards left, so you would see some connotations about those ideologies in the story, but mostly a reflection of the Iranian society at a time. And he used the village as this small society.
It was also before adapted into a film. Apparently, it was adapted into a play as well. This specific story too, which I could actually see. I could almost see like the entire village being like a set dressing on a stage.
100%.
The other thing I wanted to add for a comedic moment was when Hassan? Hassan finally becomes fully the cow, and the Boluris come at the middle of the night to steal the cow, and it's him. And then they stop him and they chase the Boluris away, and he's like, "What?" He's like, "What happened?" They're like, "Nothing. It was just the Boluris just showed up to steal Hassan." And they're like, "What?"
Yeah.
It's just like the line of like they've come to steal Hassan because they're like sort of slowly adopting him as like
as the
he
cow.
is the cow.
Yeah.
It's a very funny line. There's also something about like magical realism taking place because first of all, let me ask you guys both a question. I'd love both your answers. How did the cow die? Is it for sure? We know for sure it was Boluris came and killed him, or because that doesn't make sense. They would have came and stolen him, right? So we don't know exactly how.
Yeah, and I think it's intentional that we don't know how, because we don't know. We don't know how he died. We don't know how she died and why. Because we don't really put it. We don't.
There's
really,
blood coming out of her mouth. We know that much. So it's not like it almost seems like there was some sort of like violent act or something. It wasn't like it got sick and it threw up or something.
Yeah,
it was specifically blood pouring out of its mouth.
Poison. I mean, I don't think it ever wanted to. Like, I think it's important that is left mysterious, because then the villagers are confused, the wife is confused, and there's a very specific moment when he comes back for the first time. Is one of my favorite scenes when they tell him the cow has died, and there's a close up of him, of Mehrtash Hassan, and then he doesn't believe that she left. And he also in his brain, and kudos to Azatollah Intizami, we get to that. It was my favorite actor. Obviously, he was phenomenal in it. And then he doesn't believe that it's gone, but deep down, I feel like he believes that she's dead more than that she ever left. Because as he said, the cow would never. Anyway, to answer your question, I don't think. I think he just died of probably ate something and it was pregnant. So shit might happen with cows. I don't know.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it got some kind of weird thing in its stomach or its throat or whatever when the kids were feeding it those weird twigs. That was the only thing I could think of, because there's no way the bandits did it, because they came later to try to steal it. Like they would have known that it was dead. And I don't think anyone else in the village would have intentionally done it. So the only thing I can think of is that when the kids were like feeding it those sticks, that those sticks might have like messed up its stomach somehow. And then it died from that.
The question is, does it matter?
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter.
No.
For the purposes of plot. But yeah, I just wanted to know if there wasn't something I had missed.
I do think it matters, and we can talk about it in deeper analysis.
Should we go to behind the scenes and trivia?
Yeah.
Sure.
Behind the scenes and trivia. Okay, I'm ready. I'm going to rock you with one I bet you guys didn't look into. Just to start with.
Let's see.
Boanthropy is a real psychological disorder in which a human believes themselves to be a bovine, either a cow or an ox. Grouped together into the diagnosis of clinical lycanthropy, both Carl Jung and Freud had noted cases of it in their records. And the Bouye prince, Majd Adola, was reported to have thought himself as a cow. He would apparently frequently moo and ask to be killed so that his flesh could be consumed. He was subsequently cured of his delusion by the medieval Persian physician Avicenna.
Oh,
it is incredibly likely that the elements of the plot of The Cow were inspired by this real historical event.
Wow.
Okay. What I was reading, what I read at a time, or teachers was talking about all of this as well, is like it's the inspiration from the Metamorphosis, Ghulam Hussein Saidi, when he was writing this, the Metamorphosis of Kafka. When the character becomes a cockroach, and that's how he kind of got inspired from that and tried to tell that story there. Wow, interesting. Wow. So what was the name of the disease again?
Boanthropy. Bovine anthropy.
Boanthropy. Yeah.
Mehrtash says he was mostly influenced by Italian New Wave cinema, the films of Sergei Eisenstein, and British art house films. He felt the absences of such kind of films in Iran and thought he would try and make one. The thing he says he learned from New Realism is to seek out your own reality, not others. Try and be yourself and seek out the reality inherent in your culture, your society. The closer and deeper you go into that reality, the more universal it will become. Which I think is just good advice for film writing and
general. Yeah, kids out there, just take that advice.
Kids, all the children listening to this podcast right now.
Yeah. Financed largely by the Shah's government, the producers were aghast at the finished film as they felt it made Iran look like it was a completely backwards country. Its international acclaim made the Shah government worried that the only depiction they are getting of Iran is a small village, and they confiscated the film for over a year. The film was only allowed to be released with a disclaimer attached at the beginning stating that the events depicted happened long before the then existing regime.
Yeah, 40 years before regime, yeah.
Gov was banned for over a year by the Ministry of Culture and Arts, despite being one of the first two films in Iran to receive government funding.
This is like a consistent trend I'm noticing with a lot of these pre-revolutionary movies, is that they get like censored and banned, or they're like, they take it away and they're like, you have to change this, or you have to add this, or whatever, which to me, like when you read a lot of these Reddit threads and like a lot of this online discussions or in the chats of all these different posts that are being made a lot of times, especially by diasporic Iranians, like the children of people who left Iran or the grandchildren or whatever, which I myself am the child of people who left Iran. But often people's analysis of Iran and people's expression of Iran under the Shah, everyone's like, it was great, it was perfect. Okay, let's pump the brakes there. Obviously, comparing it to the way things are now, it was significantly different. But I wouldn't say it was anywhere near perfect. Evidenced by every single one of these movies that we've talked about that's pre-revolution have all gone through some kind of censorship, or they were pulled, or they made them change things. Like that's not something that you see in a lot of countries.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta also, like, I totally agree. Like, it was not perfect at all. Like, we might get into the politics of things over here, but like, yeah, but you gotta compare it to the countries next to it, or relative to the other countries there. Like, you gotta compare it like to Turkey at a time that was like, because you have a huge country that was very extremely religious till like early 1910s, 1920s when the Reza Shah came, and then like it forced like and was back like country was during Qajar dynasty, Iran was backwards. Like you had no Iran didn't exist really. You didn't the people were still like they had carriages in the streets and like there was no roads, there was nothing. And then it's and compare it to like the countries next to it, Iran was still the political freedom maybe wasn't great, but it wasn't as intense as it is obviously now, or the censorship is related to the images of Iran, or like what do you want to say anyway. But that's it's
for sure. I guess true. My point is more just that I have specifically heard people say that there was no censorship under the Shah. Like I have heard people say that, and I've seen people write that, and I've been like, this is revisionist history, because it was absolutely a beacon for free thought at the time, but that's a relative statement because you're comparing it to the other countries in the area, or you're comparing it to Qajar in Iran. But to just flat out say there was no censorship and people could do whatever they wanted is also, I think, being a little disingenuous.
Oh, for sure. No, there was definitely censorship there, and there was definitely you didn't have, especially near the end, the last 20 years of the Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, it got really closed off. Like it became a one-party government basically, and that one party was the rules like aligned with Shahs and everything. And a lot of this film, that's why a lot of it was actually banned. One was because he was showing Shah government at the time really tried to showcase a modern image of Iran at a time, and like really tried to show that they're a progressive country and they're going forward. And then this showed, the poverty that existed in the villages, and they did not like that, even though they were trying to fix it. Anyway, so let me give you some fun facts there and behind the scenes. To what you said, after it was banned, I don't know if you found that out, the letter that Mehrtash himself wrote to the minister after the ban. So they banned the movie, and Mehrtash was like, what the hell this is, like what am I gonna do? So what they do, because they're so like, oh, this is, no one's gonna like this is terrible, like the intellectuals don't like it, the ordinary people don't like it. And so what he did, they actually organized a private screening, and they invited intellectuals of at a time, writers, journalists, and ordinary people. And they showed them, I think it's a crowd of like 40, 50 people. Jalal Al Ahmad was one of them. Simin Daneshvar was one of them. These are at the time contemporary writers that everybody really acknowledged. And then he showed it to them. And after it was done, he wrote a letter on the feedback that he received. It was like, everyone liked it. People say the dialogue. Some people say that the dialogue is not good, but some people, Jalal Al Ahmad specifically said, oh, this is a movie that you gotta watch more than once. So he was trying to convince the government that it doesn't have that impact that the government is thinking at a time. He really tried to change their mind, and basically he did that screening. And after, I think they smuggled the movie into Venice, and then after it got the recognition, they were like, okay, so you need to put this there so it's not it shows that it's from older Iran, not now. So basically they weren't liking that he's showing the poverty that exists in the village. To that point, they actually had to wash all the walls of the village. So they water washed all the village. Wow. So it shows very pristine and clean.
Wow, yeah.
I will say the textures of the walls in the village actually stood out to me. So that's interesting.
I want to tell you another fun fact about the movie. I don't know if you guys if you saw the critics, but Mahmoud Dolatabadi is one of the actors. Probably one of the best. He's the most important contemporary writer literature. You guys should look him up. Like he at a time they were all very good friends with Mehrtash, and he now is in France, I think. Dolatabadi, his book, The Colonel, is his latest book that is still banned from Iran government, but it's translated. So it's one of the only books that has come out actually published in English and French before it was published in Farsi.
Oh,
And
wow.
because it was never published, and then you can still find it illegally, but it's not, people don't want to do it because it hasn't endorsed by him. So but yeah, he's one of the actors. He's the guy who actually goes look for the cow.
That's awesome.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah. And he's a big I was blown away when I found out that he was in it, and he never really acted in anything after that. It's another testament of like the new wave, the Iranian cinema, new wave cinema that happened. It's a reaction of all the intellectuals and all the thinkers at a time. They were like, let's do something together to change this. The world is doing it. And Mehrtash came back and he studied in UCLA. Like he studied philosophy and film there. And apparently Jean Reno was one of his teachers. So he was very influenced by him, and he comes back to Iran and then sees what the hell is happening in Iran. And they all get together, and they had, because at a time, like places like Kaf Nadari and all the other places, it was famous for all the thinkers and intellectuals to get together and like just chat about the things that were happening. And that's why a lot of leftist movements was also flourished at a time because of these analogies. But anyway, the fact that Ghulam Hossein Saidi wrote it, Mahmoud Dawlatabadi is in it, and Dariush Mehrtash directed it, it just tells you at a time like why this has such a big impact on, and why is it so different from all the other films. It's very intentionally made by people who were very influenced by the Western culture at a time, and they were intellectuals, they were thinkers, they really wanted to say something, and then just got together and made this really. And it's quite fascinating, to be honest with you. Like,
I will add to that, although Gov was highly praised and won an award at the Ministry of Culture's Film Festival, it was still denied an export permit. In 1971, the film was smuggled out of Iran and submitted to the Venice Film Festival, where, without programming or subtitles, it became the largest event of that year's festival. It won the International Critics Award at Venice.
Without subtitles?
yeah.
Yeah.
How did people...
They had to learn Farsi.
There is a
short order.
There's a fascinating article that you can still go find by someone who wrote it at a time without understanding the dialogue, and he wrote about what we talked about the cinematography, the intentions, and the acting, and all that stuff. So he didn't understand it. It was like, I can tell that I'm watching something amazing and philosophical and intentional. One more thing I would say about Dawlatabadi, because I feel like it's important if you mention his name, like just like what his influence was. Like one of his most important books was Kelaidar, who he actually wrote after the revolution, and the Tale of Baba Sopan, Qissahai Baba Sopan. They were like very influential contemporary books at a time. Anyway, I just found it interesting that he was in the movie.
Dope.
Lead actor Izzatullah Intizami had never acted in a film prior to this. He'd go on to star in 60 films after The Cow and make quite a career for himself.
He's probably the most important Iranian actor. Like, he was the Marlon Brando of Iran, I would say. Like, the level of respect that everybody knew him. From higher class to lower class, like people with no education, you would see him, you would know him.
Would you say more than Behruz Vossoughi?
Yeah, that's quite a after revolution. I would say Izzatullah Intizami was a lot more prominent. Like, you would everyone knew him, like until he died. He was very well respected. But yeah, Behruz Vossoughi, I would say, like, yeah, before revolution, he was the one that the common people, I would say, were very more familiar.
The commoners.
The commoners, yeah. People who don't listen to this podcast. Please take this out.
Meanwhile, like, Kava and I are both like praising Behruz Vossoughi in the other. So,
I love him.
he's so
But yeah,
good.
he did more film Farsi stuff like
But also after the revolution, he just went out.
He did other
right?
Iranian stuff after film Farsi as well, before the revolution. Like that, like 10, 15 year period there, he did tons of movies.
Oh yeah, and like very like Sute Delan he's one of his best performances ever in Iranian films, I would say. Like he's insane in that. He's a very or Qaisar himself. Like he was Qaisar is also attributed to is it Qaisar is like also made by Kimiyai at the same year, I would say, as this one.
I love that film and I want to do it for the podcast.
Yeah, so Qaisar is 1969.
There's nudity in that film.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and it's also attributed to Persian Iranian New Wave.
Getting to like something pretty heavy, but facing the reality of the situation, we'll get to the big topic of why we're doing this podcast. Because in March of 2022, Mehrtash publicly denounced the Shiite censorship. In front of a filled cinema crowd, Mehrtash announced, "Listen to me. I can't take it anymore," he said. "I want to fight back. Kill me. Do whatever you want with me. Destroy me, but I want my rights."
کی هستین شما؟ شما کی هستین؟ من کارشناس فلسفه از بزرگترین دانشگاه امریکا هستم. شما دارین فیلم من رو قضاوت میکنی. شما کی هستی؟ چه مدرکی داری؟ چه کاری کردی؟ چه چیزی داری بیرون؟ کی هستی تو؟ پشت پرده مثل اشباح هی به ما حکم‌زا داری میکنه. دیگه نمیتونم. دیگه میخوام بجنگم. بیاین بزنین بکشین منو. این سینه من بزنین نابودم کنی بکشی همه کارتون که هر کار میخوام بکنی ولی من حقمو میخوام بگیرم حقمو از شما میگیرم.
Consequently, on October 14th, 2023, which is 6 days ago, Dariush Mehrtash and his wife, Vahide Mohammadi were found stabbed to death in their villa in...
Okay, Meshkin Dasht, Karaj. Well, technically, Ziba Dasht in Meshkin Dasht in Karaj.
Neither the identity of the perpetrators nor the motives have been disclosed, and further details are not available. Prior to this incident, though, Vahide had posted on her social media page about anonymous personal threats, including threats from a non-Iranian individual with a knife. And on October 17th, Iranian police arrested 10 individuals suspected of being involved in the murders, including the quote-unquote main killer. Cowards came into their house, whether it's because of his films or his politics or his stance against the films and politics, and murdered him very recently. And it's been a shock, right? What was... Mehrtash, I want to start with you because I was the one who broke the news to you, right?
Yeah, you were.
Tell me your first thoughts when you heard about this.
I was extremely shocked, and I was away from the town at the time. I was having a great time, actually, just enjoying. And then you texted, and I was like, "What?" And then I had to go look up, and the fact that if he was died of natural causes, whatever, obviously it wouldn't have been this shocking to me. Like ruined my day and my night, but. It was insane.
Kaveh basically killed him if you think about it.
Yeah. And the reaction in the social media and among the Iranian artists was insane because no one believed it. And obviously you cannot, no matter what the government says, you can't help but think that they had something to do with it. Even if they didn't, people will never believe that they actually had nothing to do with it. And it's just a bad time for art and cinema in Iran. And when basically a founding father of Iranian New Wave is murdered, is quite a metaphor.
In cold blood.
It's quite a metaphor for what's happening in Iranian cinema right now by the Iranian regime, basically.
Farhan, your thoughts?
I think on that same note of what you said about even if the government wasn't involved, that people will never believe it. Funny enough, Mehrtash had, just before he was killed, had mentioned that Kiarostami's death was suspicious and that the neglect that he was given while he was in the hospital in Iran, where they were like, "Oh no, he doesn't have cancer. And then sure enough, when they took him to France, they're like, "Oh, he's had cancer for a while." He insinuated that the government knew and sort of let it happen.
There's a mention of the audio commentary for And Life Goes On. The two critics even talk about how Kiarostami's death, there was a medical accident that took place during the treatment of his cancer treatment, during surgery, and they had to rush him to Paris because there was malpractice.
Yeah, so basically malpractice. Yeah. What that happened is, I think Mehrtash in that interview also mentions that because the doctors were just they're doing their work now as well, right? So it was quite a terrible, what happened is that apparently the actual doctor who was supposed to to actually do the surgery. He didn't do it, and he sent someone else to do it. He was traveling at a time, and that person made a mistake, complications, and then they had to fly him to France, and at a time it was too late, and he passed away. And no one got, there was malpractice happened, and quite a terrible thing. No one got prosecuted, no one got blamed for, just moved on, and the doctor is just doing his thing. And Mehrtash was extreme because basically they killed him, by the lack of oversight and the lack of responsibility.
Well, and for a long time before even that point, the doctors were denying that he even had cancer. So even before that happened, the doctor's like, oh, he doesn't have cancer. Like, we don't know what's going on. Blah 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 blah. He's fine. This and that. He like slipped into a coma and everything.
Was it cancer? Like I don't remember that he was even.
I
That
think
was
in the end,
the official statement was he had died of cancer before they even admitted all the other stuff.
Oh.
the doctors in France even confirmed that he did have cancer.
Yeah, died of gastrointestinal
cancer.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to critical reactions?
Sure.
Keep the flow going. I already mentioned the Shah's producers' reactions, but worth mentioning, he who shall not be named, although I've already named him once, the leader of the Islamic Revolution of 1979, he considered this one of his favorite films.
Khomeini. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah. He considered this one of his favorite films. But, F what he thinks. But this, in turn, has been reported to being one of the saving graces that allowed Iranian cinema to continue rather than being banned in the Iranian Revolution. Because Mehrtash, at the time, being critical of the Shah, and also, I think, give him credit not knowing where that was going to lead, had actually met with Khomeini in Paris, according to reports, had actually photographed him and flew back in a plane with him. So I think their discussions about cinema, I don't know, like Mehrtash, you grew up there, so how do you feel with that fact being? I mean, it is fact, right? This isn't like hearsay that
I don't know how much of
visited him.
I don't know how much of a fact it is, but they do say that. I don't think it's written anywhere, but people attribute that. I don't know if there was one rumor that got out of the way, but yeah, he didn't ban cinemas. I wouldn't be surprised if he was because of this film, because Shah was critical of the film, and then he was critical of he liked everything that Shah didn't like, obviously, and it was religious stuff in the movie, and I'm pretty sure he didn't understand it, what the movie was about. But yeah, at the time, Mehrtash himself they're all regretful of what happened, but they were all for Khomeini, right? They were all for revolution. They were all for. They had these agendas and these mentalities, and they were against, and they thought something better was going to come out, and then he basically came and destroyed them. It's a common story of all the people who were involved in the revolution are regretful now, and all the so-called intellectuals at a time, and what they were thinking, and then they just didn't get what they were hoping for, and they now realize that maybe a cleric is not the best leader. For surprise there.
Deeper analysis. You know what, I'll start with you, Farhan, because you have not talked in a while.
So deeper analysis for me, there's kind of two. One of them is a little bit about the thesis of the film. And I think that the film is kind of all about dignity and how we treat people. Whether it's the village idiot or the bandits from the other village who are poor, and they're like, okay, well, we're poor, so we need food to survive, so we're going to go steal from the other village. So that's the way that they're treating them. Lying to Hassan to spare his pain, but then the lying makes it worse. Trying to empathize with him, and ultimately treating him like an animal is what sets him off down the hill where he ultimately meets his fate. I think the movie is constantly providing commentary on the way that human beings treat one another. And it's a film about how do we do that and maintain dignity. So that for me is kind of what the movie was about, or at least what I took away from it. And allegorically, and I'm curious to see what allegories you guys pull from this, but my watching of the film, I kind of felt like this might have been a commentary on the way that he was viewing Iranian society at the time, where you have Hassan, who's this sweet man that everybody loves and everybody respects him, is, I think, supposed to be a stand-in for the Iranian people, right? But through an unfortunate series of events, he loses the thing that's so precious to him. And when he loses that thing that's precious to him, he goes mad. And he starts to act like a cow, and he starts to like act weird and act like an animal. And he devolves because he loses this thing that's so precious to him. Now, I wonder if that is an allegory for Iranian society at the time. What is the thing that the Iranian people lost that was dear to them that led to them becoming animals? Is it this view of spirituality? Is that what he's commenting on? That, oh, this led to godlessness? Is it their ability to express themselves, where a few decades prior, at least in parliament and through elections and through conversations and rising political parties, people felt as though they could express themselves, and that expression was taken away, and now people are in these dire situations? I don't know, but that was something that I pulled from it. Not necessarily that something I agree with, but it's something that I recognize might be a parallel that the writers were drawing between Hassan and the Iranian people or Iranian society at the time. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that.
You say godlessness, but it really is govlessness.
There you go.
Also, for the listeners of this podcast, I want to clarify, I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment. Like the sentiment of, oh, this, like the people of Iran became animals and they were like godless and whatever. I don't agree with that. What I'm saying is that at the time, this was a sentiment that was very prominent in Iran, that people had lost their spirituality and they were becoming godless, which was one of the things that led to the rise in the revolution.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't. Again, I think one of the beauty of this film and the stories that it's based on is we can get all this interpretation out of it. I'm pretty sure if you go back to Saidi or Mehrtash themselves and be like, hey, what exactly were these characters symbol of? Maybe he has a proper answer, or sometimes it's just a feeling and sentiment that you put there. Probably he did. But yeah, I don't know if the godlessness of people is, it's to me because now that we're talking about the deeper analysis of like how society is basically portraying this village as a symbol of the Iranian society at a time, and the head of the village, the Kat Khoda, not knowing a lot of things and asking the wise guy. These are all symbols. And we talked about that character who's always in his window and asking what's going on. Like that's a symbol of a lot of people in Iran who were just not interested in what's going on and just like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna do my own thing. I'm not really interested in any of this. And then himself, the paranoia, like basically the three villagers from Buluriha, they say that it's a symbol of the outsider that are gonna come and take everything away from you, and that's the fear of the Shah at a time that it has in the society, and the cow being the only source of income, basically their only source of like dairy and the value that they had. It's the symbol of the dependency of Iran to oil and the paranoia that the Shah had at a time, and not and being afraid that it's gonna destroy the whole village if this is gone away. So
so the idea is Bulur is like the Western nations,
so
like the U.S. or England, like wanting to come and take
Iraq,
the oil. Is that
even Iraq? Anything, like it could have been any external threat.
It could have anything, and also the name Bulur is not coincidental, right? Bulur is crystal. It's something that's like lightening, and it's something that's supposed to. They know it all. Like they are the one who.
It's
who
enlightenment.
Like it's enlightenment.
Okay, so that is the same word. I was wondering if it was like spelt differently or something.
No, it's the same.
It's the same word.
And all the other names are also, if you go back, like Islam is the guy who knows everything, right?
Yeah.
And that's not coincidental by choice, right?
Yeah.
And the metamorphosis of this character when you take away his everything, and his only meaning in life, and then you take that away, and then he doesn't accept it, and he becomes that thing, and he doesn't want to. Again, it's symbolism of everything that was going on at a time, or at least what the intellectuals at the time were thinking about Iran society.
What I don't know this, but what is the mythology, I guess, around Hassan in like Shia Muslim teaching in Iran?
So Hassan is the second son of Ali, the eldest son of Ali. Hassan, they say in Shia, he's the third Ali. Hassan Hussein is the second Imam in Shia mythology, and he's the wise guy who is actually got defeated in a battle, basically, and they don't want to talk about it. They say like he chose not to go to war like his younger brother Hussein, who is a big character in Shia religion. He's famous. Hassan is always famous for being the wise guy, the wise prophet who gave up himself for the good of the society, basically. That's what the kind of principle behind it is.
Do you think there are parallels to draw between like Islamic Hassan and the Hassan in the film?
I don't know. I'm sure because again, knowing what he wrote, and knowing how aware he was about what he's writing, I'm pretty sure he chose all these names properly, or maybe if he didn't have any religious I don't know. It's interesting because it was also a very common name at a time, religious name,
true.
and the village is very religious, so all the names are very religious. Hassan, Hussein, Islam, like all these people.
No rezas.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Masht is someone who goes visit Mashhad. They would become Mashdi. Yeah.
Can I drop some deeper analysis truth bombs on you guys?
Please do.
No.
I'm going to bring up two things: Kurt Vonnegut's book Mother Night, and Karl Marx's theory of social alienation.
Okay.
Mother Night is actually my favorite Kurt Vonnegut book, and the main thesis of that is you are what you pretend to be. And in the story, this guy is infiltrating Nazis essentially for so long. He spent so many years infiltrating Nazis that he's slowly like becoming one, even though he's trying to spy on them. Which I feel like is something. There's something very like, you pretend to be a cow long enough, the world will treat you as such. Whatever you pretend to be for long enough, you will become that, even if you're pretending or whatever. The other thing is,
fake it till you make it.
Well, I'm gonna drop a Persian expression exactly like that. It's like کپکی که ادای مرغا رو در می‌آورد راه رفتن خودش هم یادش رفت.
But it's I guess the idea is if you walk and cluck like a chicken long enough,
you
forget how to walk like yourself.
are you familiar with Marx's theory of alienation?
Not too much. Yeah, no.
I am not.
His criticism of capitalism was that like it diminishes the human experience, and so it says that human experience becomes worthless under capitalist society. The sense of self diminishes and disappears. So basically, in this situation, it's like Hassan has lost, because he's lost the cow, and it's very important, I think, that there's only one cow in the village. And he's the one who's the caretaker of the cow. He's the owner of the cow. So it's like that cow gave him purpose and meaning in this village. So it's not just that the cow is gone that he loved like a child, but now his sense of purpose in this community is gone. And I think all the stuff you're saying, Mehrtash, about the parallels to the Shah is very interesting, because I hadn't even made that connection. But it's like, without this cow, Hassan knows that his place, he's not needed anymore. So it's like not just that the cow is gone, his purpose and his identity is gone. And this idea of like, this theory of social alienation is like, in a capitalist society, if we depend on capitalism, it's like those products, the mechanisms of capitalism will take away our sense of self, our sense of worth, and it'll take it, like it makes us castaways and alienated from the rest of society. He's essentially saying that how important it is to feel useful and worthwhile. He instantly he feels he isn't worth anything to anyone in the townspeople anymore. So he is like the next village idiot. He's a castaway. And that reality is what's breaking his brain. The nervous breakdown isn't coming from the cow that I love is gone. It's from I am no longer a useful product to my society anymore. And he can't handle that logically. And that's why I think the village idiot is there too. Is like he realizes like you need the parallels of seeing like worthless people in society and useful people in society. And I feel like when you bring up the oil of the cow allegories and the Shah of being Hassan, I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
So I'm gonna read because I found a very good article that's written a long time ago there you go. So it's written by Amir Soltani on March 2015. I'm just gonna paraphrase here. The cow is a richly layered film. Mercury thinks of it as a philosophical exercise, not unlike the Metamorphosis, but there's a specifically Iranian angle at play, influenced by the Sufi beliefs of unity between lover and muse. Mercury's background in philosophy allowed him to infuse Saidi's original text with mysticism, but the film was nevertheless read politically. As Mercury lists in his booklet interview with actor-director Mani Haqiqi, was a great filmmaker himself. You guys should go, everybody who listens to this should go look him up. The country's situation at the time was such that the politics could not be evaded among the among the intellectuals and the artists, but interpreting the cow politically wasn't just sign of the time. So it means like it did have intentions of politics in it to begin with.
I think to kind of expand a little bit on the allegory that you made, I think this idea that the Shah is almost like, oh, now that the reliance on oil is gone, like it's not just oil, like I am the oil, I am the value, I am these things. That's like an interesting way to look at it. Similarly, I think in the analogy that the cow is a stand-in for like spirituality, and where that's no longer as infused in society, all of a sudden you have a massive group in society that declares, no, we are religion, we are spirituality, we are what is just and whatever, but they become this like mutated fake version of these things, of spirituality and of these deeper philosophical passions that people have. They become these like empty copies of these things.
Best scene, favorite scene for you guys. Do you have one?
Ooh, yeah, many.
I'll go first. Mine was when he first arrives to hear the cow is missing, and he's got the tears in his eyes, and the performance when he goes on the rooftop, and he's like, "I'm gonna sit out and watch for the boluris," and he's like, "My cow is in the. Why would you lie to me? My cow is in the barn."
قاب من که در نمیره کت خدا آخه اگه در بره کجا میتونه بره
گاو تو در رفته مشتی مشتسن تو که خودت صبح رفتی تویله دیدی برادر من آخه من که به تو دروغ نگفتم بابا
گاو من همینجاست تو تویله
اگه گاوت همینجا تو تویله است پس چرا نمیری پیشش
خب برو تو تویله پیش گاوت دیگه
آره بابا برو پیش گاوت دیگه راست میگه مشتی.
That moment for me was like really touching, and I thought the performance was really good. It's probably my favorite scene.
My favorite scene is when he's washing the cow. I just thought it was so sweet and endearing, seeing how much he loved this cow.
Yeah. I have a lot of favorite scenes, and I wrote them all, and but by far, I would say it's basically a shot within a scene when they're actually throwing the cow in the well, and then you see the shot of the face of the cow. Yeah. Just hitting on the wall, and then to cut back to that with him dying at the end. I found that extremely powerful. And then obviously the end scene when they actually you tapped into that far on when they start in the rain, they're all going, and he's a cow now. He's metamorphed into a cow, and then they're trying to pull him, and then he starts hitting him. Islam starts hitting him and calling him an animal. That's like a insanely powerful scene for me. One of the other thing I think I wrote here, I said like many, but the best one is when they watch Hassan running away as a cow with the use of the mute, when the whole villages are coming up and he's like throwing a tantrum and he's like making a noise and he runs away from the stable and he starts running away from the village at night, and then we see him just gone, and the use of music and that again Kurosawa-esque kind of way that we show the villagers and then him running away, it's just it hit you.
Yeah. Least favorite scene. For me, it's the it keeps cutting away to the B plots. It's like the bandit giving the chicken in the middle of the night. The woman saying that her brother's in Boluri, and it just like for some reason, it's either not giving enough of those. I get that it's giving like an image of the townspeople, but yeah, I just didn't. To me, it didn't gel that well.
Yeah, and I think for similar reasons, my least favorite scene is the stuff with the women with the flags. I feel like there wasn't enough context there, so I didn't quite understand what was going on. I think I did, but I don't know. Just because it bumped me a little bit is why it's my least favorite. I'm not saying I hated the scene. It's just my least favorite because it kind of stood out a little as I couldn't really understand 100% what was going on.
Yeah, but I think mine is actually the same as yours, Farhan, is that moment with the religious figures and like the mourning of, this spiritual wealth that they all had. And like, I get the point of it, why it's put there, like why they want to really showcase that. But I don't think it's really working for me. And it's just, it's just showcasing that religiousness of Iran. So it's necessary to show it, but I don't think it was working. And also the B plots, I have to agree on that. I think we already talked about it. I don't think it's really working. They feel forced, but yeah, it's just not a lot of things that I didn't like about that film. But if I had to pick, I would say that these two, yeah.
Damn, That's Poetry, where we discuss our favorite quotes from the film. Actually, my first one was, "My cow would never run away wherever would she go. My cow's right there in the barn," because his like sense of denial. But then I think on further inspection, Farhan, you and I share one.
Yeah.
So you take yours because I think mine is the same as yours as my number one favorite. Mm-hmm.
It's nothing, man. The Buluris came and tried to steal Mehrtash, which I thought was hilarious.
هیچی بابا بلوریا آمده بودن مشتسنه بدزدن
Even like the way that it's delivered is very colloquial. It's like Hichi Baba.
Yeah.
It's like nothing, man. Like
nothing,
bro. Yeah. Like and it's all to this again, that same character in the peanut gallery, like sticking his head out the window after like this massive dramatic scene has happened. He like sticks his hand out. He's like, "Wait, what's going on outside?" They're like, "Nothing, man. They came and they tried to steal our cow, man." He's like, "Oh, okay."
For me, the most poetic that I remember watching it. I was like, "Oh man, that's a lot." Is when he's on the rooftop waiting. He's basically a cow on a rooftop waiting for Mehrtash to come back, and the villagers, the three men, come and ask him like, "Hey, why don't you come out and like go water your cow in the stable and you'll see that he's not there." It's like, no, Mehrtash needs to come back to give me water. And it's like, he's going to give me water where the moon comes out. And they're like, what if the moon doesn't come out? And it's like, when my cow is thirsty, the moon will come out. It's like, گاو من که تشنش باشه ماه هم بیرون میاد. It's like the moon is dependent on my cow. Like everything is surrounded by my cow. And the reaction of the
مشتی تو نشستی اینجا اگه حیوان تشنش بشه چی؟ وقتی مادر اومد براش آب میبرم.
خب اگه مادر نیامد چی؟
هر وقت گاو من تشنش بشه ما هم در میاد.
the guys, when they hear this, it's just shot beautifully and just affects it very, very well.
Okay. Next section is favorite performance. Mehrtash, who is your favorite performance in the film?
I mean, it's Izzatullah Intizami. Like it's hands down the best performance in the movie, to my opinion. It's just, and the fact that they were not, this was their, all of the actors there, this was their first ever cinema acting, and they were theater actors, and this was his first work, and he knocks it out of the park. I think his performance is subtle when it needs to be, it's big when it needs to be, and he plays a cow to perfection. Like it's you feel sad and depressed and it's very, very, very impactful for me. And I think he won awards in Chicago for it. I think it's one of the few festivals the film went.
I agree. Yeah, the fact that he does really play a convincing cow, it's even almost in his eyes. Like he becomes more animalistic and he's like lost. The humanity is gone in his eyes,
Yeah.
which is really impressive. And considering the fact that, like we mentioned in trivia, that this was his first performance, acting role ever.
Yeah.
And he's like, even he brings his eyes to like watery tears, which is really impressive. So yeah, it's for me. Is that's what I Intizari as well.
For me, it's actually not him. He's like definitely top contender for it, but I would give it to Ali Nasirian, who played the role of Islam, especially because in a lot of his scenes, he conveys so much without even talking. Like he'll just from the way that he changes the expression on his face, his eyes, how he turns his head, his hands, his body language. He conveys so much in just movement and the way he portrays himself. Like one scene that really stands out to me is when when he finally calls Hassan an animal, and then he's immediately filled with so much regret and disgust in himself, and he really feels bad and he's heartbroken over the state of Hassan. And then the scene afterwards when he says that he's going to go out and look for him, like those scenes were so profound. His performance was so profound.
What something you're saying that makes me actually, I just realized now too, is like he does carry the weight of the burden of the emotional weight of the drama after Hassan is turned into a cow.
That's true.
Like once Hassan turns into a cow, he's not really a human with emotions anymore. He's a cow. So like what you're saying is he like was it Islam you said?
Yeah.
That's his name. So it's like he's carrying the emotional weight for the rest of the drama, which is something that didn't even occur to me.
And it does it brilliantly. And it's to me, it's funny because this being their first ever cinema, you could see the resonance of the remnant. Like I mean, the beginning of their style of acting, like Nasirinia, like the way that he walks out of the room with his head first, and then the way he turns his head to look at people. That's something that he's keep doing for the rest of his career. So to me, that was just like very fascinating to watch all of these people for the first time. And I have to say, I have to mention Parviz Fanizadeh in this film. He's the one who has the character with his ships being stolen by Buluria. Like he's just, because he later on goes on and plays in Daija Napoleon, right? Like the Uncle Napoleon. He's brilliant, and he's in Kimiai films as well. I think Tank Seed he plays. Anyway, so his performance to me just stood out because I already knew that it's him. So I kept paying attention to it.
I also just want to call out the fact that Ali Nasirian, who plays Islam, looks a lot like an Iranian Lee Van Cleef, and Mahmoud Dolatabadi looks a lot like an Iranian Pedro Pascal, which I think is something that all three of us picked up on.
He was a good-looking guy, man. Like he was a brilliant writer. Like these guys, man, back then they had it all, and they did a revolution. They screwed themselves over.
Let's move to nitpicks and hot takes, and we'll combine it with what aged poorly. Because I don't have too many nitpicks, but I will say what aged poorly. There's something strange about if he who shall not be named, whose last name starts with a K, calls this his favorite movie of all time. You know, as time goes on, you might want to take pause and wonder why that is.
And to me, that adds credit to my allegorical analysis of the film that the cow is supposed to represent spirituality. Khomeini saw that and he's like, yo, this is deep.
You mean he who shall not be named?
Sure. He who shall not be named. Mine are, I guess, a few technical ones are the slow-mo in the film wasn't done very well. And I think that's probably because they didn't shoot at high frame rate. Maybe the camera couldn't do it, or they didn't plan to do it that way. And likely through the use of an optical printer, they played the footage that they got back slowly and recaptured it on film at a slower frame rate, which just looks choppy. And the crash zooms I felt were a little out of place. Again, a product of the time when zoom lenses were introduced. All of a sudden, everyone was trying to find ways to implement them into films. Also, this might be a hot take. I thought the premise itself was maybe like 5% too absurd. I like the premise. I think that you either go more absurdist with the film or more realistic. It felt like a weird middle ground, which at times worked and at times it didn't. But that's like that's a massive hot take, and even for myself, I'm kind of grasping at straws with that one. And what aged poorly on top of that, I would say, is just the fact that there's like no female characters in the movie with any real weight to them. And this was also at a time where Gugush was starring in tons of movies, or you have like even in Gavasna, which we already reviewed, the main female lead in that film also has she's a much stronger character than any of the women that we see in this film.
Yeah. The one that hasn't aged very well. I mean, again, a product of the time, which is the women are not very strongly shown here, and there's not a lot of strong women characters. Some of it is related to the story that they're trying to tell at the time. Religious figures, really, back in the days, women weren't as prominent, right? So back in a very religious village, but also the religious rituals that it shows, it's a personal taste for me that I didn't really love. But yeah, there's not much I didn't like about this movie. Even the slow motions that are bad, I feel like because I'm used to being from that time and they all look like that, so it didn't really bother me. But yeah, from now when you look at it, like, oh, that's choppy, that's terrible. But yeah, I think that would be mine.
All right, great. Double feature lineup. For me, I would actually pair this with a movie like Elephant Man. Not just because there's an animal in the title of both films, but
that's a very good suggestion.
Because of the title or because of the contents of the film?
Because I hadn't thought about that, and I like it a lot.
Oh, great. Yeah, and I think it's largely because you have these two characters who are treated poorly, or in some cases they're treated with pity and love, but both characters go through so much pain and anguish as these vulnerable people in a society that is critical of people's usefulness or uselessness, however they perceive it. And it goes back to the thesis of the film for me, is that this whole movie is about dignity and how you treat people, whether that is the village idiot or you treat the poor people in the village next door that you go and steal from, whether it's about this man who you don't want him to be sad over the loss of his cow, or he starts to think he's becoming a cow. Or in the case of the Elephant Man, this man who is suffering from this physical condition that makes him look deformed in the eyes of those in the community.
That's a very good take. Yeah, I mean, that's a good, very double feature. I like that a lot. I thought that we should pick Mehrtash film, so I haven't thought about a double feature from non-Iranian film or anything else. I would line it up with his own work, Hamoon, after this. It would be an intense night of watching movies if you're watching double features. They're two very heavy movies. But the philosophical aspect of them and the difference between the time that it shows, I think it shows the interest of the director very well, and shows the grasp that he has at what he's doing, and goes back to his, I guess, philosophy degree and what he thinks of life. But if I were to change it up a little bit, and if double feature with something lighter, I would use Mehmoon Maman, which is Mama's Guests, which something he made way later on in his career. His comedy is great. Cultural influence, people is still kind of quoted here and there, and it shows basically kind of poverty after revolution and poverty here, but the beauty that exists within that poverty within the Iranian culture.
That's a very good one. I have two. I would pair The Cow up with either 400 Blows, because we could just do a double feature night of new wave film, new wave cinema, with let's see how the French do new wave, and then pair it up with an Iranian new wave film. Or to take it in an entirely different tone, pair it up with a Mehrtash double lineup. You could do Cow first, which is a heavier film, but then you pair it up with one of his comedies, specifically The Tenants, which also stars Izzatollah Intizami, and you could just have a double feature Mehrtash night, two different tones to mix up the evening.
Yeah, I don't see why not. Like, to me, it's a fairly self-contained film. The film itself is already a period piece. So, yeah, I don't see why you can't do this as a modern Hollywood film.
I will also say yes. And not knowing Mehrtash's answer, there's a difference about whether or not it can be done or should be done.
Yes. Yeah.
But I say it can be done. And if I was a Hollywood producer, one of my takes would be like, let's see Roger Eggers, who directed The Witch, and he's done a few other films. It's like he did The Lighthouse.
It's pronounced
too.
witch.
The Witch. How is like his take on horror specifically too, and this whole thing, metamorphosis and Kafka-esque kind of storytelling. I think the tale of madness around The Lighthouse makes his filmography. I'd very much like to see him take on this adaptation, an American Hollywood adaptation of The Cow. Where you really kind of see that, or even David Lynch, as I'm thinking about Lynchian.
I was going to say Lynch as well.
That'd be very cool.
Or Cronenberg.
Yeah.
So yeah, those I feel like it could be done, and there could be some interesting takeaways. I don't think it'd still be cinematic blasphemy, and it would probably be the lesser. It'd be the lesser version of the two, but yes, it can be done.
I agree. I would say yes, of course. It wouldn't, not that it should be done. I don't think it should never be done. But if it was ever going to be a new modern version of it, yeah, a different take or different genre of it, or I would focus on a different character in it, to be honest with you, because all the Jamshid Mashayekhi or Ali Nasirian character, they all have their own things to say. If they wanted to do that, I think I would be happy. But I like what Kava said of like a whole different genre of this would be very fascinating to watch. Like Cronenberg, as Farhan said, is like it's really fun. I would like to watch that.
But if Cronenberg, if you're listening to this, if you decide to adapt this, please have actual Iranians involved in the creative process of your film.
Yeah. Final thoughts and grades. Farhan, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I think I don't have too much more to add beyond what I've already said. I will say that overall, this was not the movie that I was expecting. It technically speaking held up a lot better than I thought it would. It is incredibly beautiful. And I think the fact that we each drew very different, deeper analysis from this film says a lot about the value of this film in Iranian cinema. And I think that it's a movie that a lot of us should be watching and having conversations about. And I think also don't be afraid to go outside of your comfort zone when you're drawing symbolism from the film, because like we just found in our discussion, we're all learning totally different viewpoints about the film. And I think that each one of them is valid. And I think each one of them will make our next viewing of the film even more impactful to us. So
right.
That being said, I am going to give this film a B, which isn't the lowest that I've given a film, and it's not the highest in our series so far. It's probably somewhere roughly in the middle. But I do think that it's a beautiful film, and it's definitely a movie that everybody should be watching. So yeah, a B grade for me, a solid B.
Mehrtash, final thoughts and grades.
Final thought of a movie. I think it's a brilliant movie. I think there's a reason why Iranian critics call it like the best Iranian movie in Iranian cinema. I don't necessarily fully agree on that. I would say it's definitely there, top 3, top 5. The cultural influence, the technical abilities, the understanding of a story in cinema and the language and the delivery, everything is really amazingly put. And the directorial choices that he makes is very conscious, is very intentional. The use of dollies and movements and blocking is quite phenomenal. And it's I think it's a movie that was way ahead of its time, or at least in line with a lot of masterful movies that were being made at a time in Europe, or mostly in Europe, not in Hollywood really. But I would rate this, okay, if A plus would be my highest score, I'm gonna give it from 100. like a Rotten Tomato score. I would give this a 98.
98. We call that an A plus on our scale.
Yeah, this is relevant to the, I would say, because it's the time. Like I call Bicycle Thief probably my favorite film of all time, and the things that they're doing and everything. If you show that film to someone like right now coming out of film school, be like, oh, is this the first film you've ever watched? They probably wouldn't say yes, right? But I watched it at a good time, and I'm very anal about my, the techniques in cinema and like what the beginners of the art did, and that is now common and people don't even realize it. I do think that this film did that for Iranian cinema, and I think for that I have to give it credit and kind of consider it for what it did, and the fact that it held up to this point and we still watch it, and there's a podcast about it right now and we talk about it. That just means that how important the movie was and how good it was.
I'm sort of right in the middle of both of you guys. I give it an A minus because I think the film is technically a masterpiece. The cinematography, every frame is a portrait. And I really like sort of like it's almost like a deceptively simple story, but I think there's a lot of layer complexity and there's a lot of allegory, and it's perfect. I mean, to me, it's a very, very good film. It's far from perfect, not far from perfect. It's not perfect in my opinion, but it's very, very good. So that's why I give it the A minus. It's more of a poetic film than it is a narrative film. I think it's more about the poetry of the scenes rather than an arcing story about completing a journey, which is fine. It's to taste. It's not that it's bad. It's just, to me, it was like, it's not my favorite.
No, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think, it is definitely, it's poetic. Like it's not, again, if you show it to people who don't appreciate at all poetic cinema, like they would hate it. So the fact that I agree.
That means that our show average score for The Cow is an A minus.
Yes.
Yeah.
To me, it's a film about loss of identity and loss of self and loss of purpose. And when I look at the generations that fled Iran after the revolution, I can't help but be stuck with the feeling that this film was somewhat foreseeing the future of a lot of troubled dichotomies and parallels that the Iranian identity contains within itself. Mehrtash life came at a tragic end, one that at the time of this recording we are still processing, but the fact that he'd called out all those who stood in his way, from critics to censors to the government, shows that this man and the legend never for a moment took his foot off the pedal of the passion, and he let the world know exactly how he felt. Mr. Mehrtash, hats off to you. Iranian cinema and art as a whole owes a great and eternal debt to you. May you and your wife, Vahide Mohammadi, rest in peace. Thank you, Mehrtash, for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. This was a pleasure and pure joy.
As always, thank you, Farhan.
Thank you, Kaveh, and thank you everyone for listening.
Be umid didar.
Be umid didar.
Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Set Nijad.